Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò. It's my great pleasure to welcome you for this very special evening. We knew that it was kind of special for the power of attraction that these two films have, and also for the speaker that we have to talk about them. Antonio is going to introduce properly the books and the movies we are talking about, and I'm going to say something about Antonio. Tonight is going to be a bit more personal than usual. Antonio, you arrived in 1994. Exactly like
March
me.
will be 30.
So it's our 30th anniversary. And I would say that from the very beginning, we started collaborating on a variety of different projects. And I'm very proud and very grateful to count Antonio among my best friends and the best friends of the Casa. He has brought us here all sort of people from all walks of life, artists, directors, actors, writers. Many of you are in the audience, so you know who I'm talking about. And his generosity in sharing his network of contacts and his experiences is really extraordinary. And for this, I thank him very much. And I'm asking you to celebrate our 30th anniversary of Cultural Partner. Casa really couldn't be what it is without Antonio and his support. Tonight, he picked these two films. They're two of his favorite films ever. He also has a series, a web series called I film della mia vita that you can look up. He has a very long life and a very intense life when it comes to cinema. But I knew that these two films had a very, very special place in his heart. And he did a similar presentation in Bologna a couple of weeks ago, and I was in Italy, so I went to hear him. And I have to say that it was the first time I heard him really be a professor of cinema. And that's what he does. That's his main job. You know that, right? He's a professor of cinema at the Tisch School of the Arts, and he does that pretty well. But you know, when he's here, we celebrate Antonio, the writer and the cultural organizing and the co-founder of the Conversazioni. But I had never seen him really give a class of cinema with the stills, the clips, stopping. And I was fascinated, and I said, "You're going to do this at the Casa." He wanted me on the stage. I'm very much useless this night because he's going to do the thing. And I might contradict him for the pleasure of dialectic a little bit, but it's going to be his show. And I'm very happy that he's doing this here, and you're in for a treat. And I think there are some of our students, both in your class and in my class, take notes because you're going to be examining on this, even when they're the very personal opinion of Antonio. And Antonio, give us an idea of why you picked these two iconic films, and tell us something as a way of introduction.
First of all,
what we can expect.
Thank you all. Second, as Michael Corleone would say, I'm legitimate. So, why? I mean, I saw this film when I was a little kid, and they still are with me. I think it's both extraordinary films. But let's start from the books. Why don't we start, and I'll respond to you while watching a few clips. Why don't we start, Julian? Il Gattopardo, The Leopard, came out, published by Feltrinelli in 1958. It was published posthumous because Einaudi, which is the most important, influential, prestigious Italian publishing house, refused twice the manuscript. I would say for ideological reason, but we'll go there later. Il Padrino, The Godfather, came 11 years later, 1969. It was immediately a huge success, and so was Il Gattopardo. It's hard to say that The Godfather, the novel, is a great book. I don't think there is any literary quality there. However, there are two essential qualities for a great adaptation: great characters and a great plot.
Already in the book, you're saying?
Yes.
Even for
yes,
yes.
I would say so. And Il Gattopardo, the novel, is slightly different from the book, meaning that there are three missing chapters. The three final chapters of the novel are not in the book. But the screenwriters, Suso Cecchi D'Amico, Enrico Medioli, Massimo Franciosa, and Pasquale Festa Campanile, of course, together with Luchino Visconti, decided to convey the idea of dying, of death, all through the film. We'll watch a clip about that. Because these two films are about dying. Not only dying physically, but dying morally. And let's go now to the second slide, which is... these are the three directors that were picked by Paramount to direct The Godfather: Peter Bogdanovich, Sergio Leone, and Sam Peckinpah. They all decided they were not interested. It would have been a completely different film. I was curious. I would be curious to see a Peckinpah version of The Godfather, to be honest. Now we go to the next clip, which is, I think, this is also another director who was hired to direct the Leopard, Ettore Giannini. Ettore Giannini made only one film called Carosello Napoletano, which is probably the most beautiful musical ever made in Italy, all with Neapolitan songs. He was hired, he wrote a script, Goffredo Lombardo, the producer, hated the script. He said it was like Sicilian Carousel, and then he fired him and he hired Luchino Visconti. The point is that both films were not Visconti and Coppola's project. They were hired to make the film, which makes very, very interesting what we see in a second. And now we'll see, I think the original cast, this is Robert Evans, who was the head of production of Paramount Pictures, and that is Goffredo Lombardo, head of Titanos. Now look at the original cast for The Godfather. This Richard Conte, Carlo Ponti, the producer, and of course Laurence Olivier were the original choice for Don Vito Corleone. What makes interesting is...
But Ponti, did he act before?
No, but no. And Laurence Olivier was
Sophia
also...
Loren, right?
Yes.
His connection to theater.
But, I think it's quite offensive. I mean, he's Italian, why not a mafioso? He's powerful, rich. And Laurence Olivier was also the original idea for the Prince of Salina in The Leopard. Same actor. But at the time he was sick and he couldn't, get the job. The second choice for The Leopard, next slide, is Nikolai Cherkasov, Ivan the Terrible. And actually Visconti really wanted him. The point was completely... He was an alcoholist. He couldn't act. He was completely desperate somewhere in Siberia. This is what Enrico Medioli told me. So they went back, and Goffredo Lombardi imposed Bar Lancaster. But I'll tell you about Bar Lancaster later. Now we'll see the original cast for Michael Corleone. Can you believe this? 3 typical Italian Americans: Warren Beatty, Ryan O'Neal, and Robert Redford. I would say we're lucky.
And they all said no. Were they asked to do it?
Ryan O'Neal was asked, and the other 2 were just considered. And now we'll see, there is one thing in common between the 2 films. Nino Rota, the musician for both films. The soundtrack was written by Nino Rota with one exception. There is an original waltz unpublished in The Leopard, but all the rest is Nino Rota. As you might remember, Nino Rota won an Oscar for The Godfather Part 2. The reason why he didn't get an Oscar for Part 1, whose music is even better, actually it's almost the same, he added maybe a couple of notes, is because the music for Godfather Part 1 was already used in a previous film, which is very typical Italian, directed by Eduardo...
It's the art of recycling, there is nothing wrong with it.
So it was not eligible. And finally, and now we start with the clips, the 2 cinematographers. The reason why I ended with the cinematographers, because in the first clip I want to say something about the cinematography. On top you have Gordon Willis, one of the great cinematographers. His nickname was Prince of Darkness. I'll show you why. And on the bottom, Peppino Rotunno. Gordon Willis, together with Godfather Part 1, 2, and 3, made, Manhattan by Woody Allen. Peppino Rotunno made several Fellini films, including Amarcord, but also Baron von Munchausen by Terry Gilliam. One thing before we start with the clips. The first and final clips are quite long, 7-8 minutes. All the others are a couple of minutes. So bear with me, but it's important to see the entire sequence at the beginning and at the end. And the second thing is, when I speak about The Godfather, I speak about Godfather 1 and 2. I consider it as a unicum. I don't even want to consider Part 3, which I think is like one of those distant relatives that we are a little bit embarrassed, but they carry the same name, so there is very little we can do. So let's watch now the first clip. I say that I wanted to start from the cinematography. It's interesting what you see here, because now it seems quite normal, but at the time was absolutely extraordinary, because you do not see the eyes of the characters in The Godfather. He asked Gordon Willis to underexpose of 2 stops the light. And the reason is he doesn't want to show the eyes. And if we consider the eyes the mirror of the soul, what is telling us they have no soul, they're losing or they've lost their soul. It's very different what Rotunno does in Sicily at the beginning of The Leopard. By the way, both opening scenes are fantastic. And I think they say almost everything already about the films. He shows everything, he shows the eyes. But one striking difference is this scene happens basically at the same time, at the same hour of the other scene. But we do not see anything. We catch a glimpse from the slides, we understand that it's daytime, but they're plotting in the darkness and they're plotting a crime, or a revenge if you prefer. They are closed in this room, and we do not understand at the beginning. Imagine to see the film for the first time. Why this man is dressed in a tuxedo? Why is listening to this other man? Who is this other man? Clearly an Italian American who believes in America. And not only that, but then the camera goes back and we reveal two other guys. Who are they? We know that one is Sonny, his son, James Caan, and the other one is adopted son, il consigliori actually, Tom Hagen. But this is a closed world who keeps his secrets. Differently from the other world. Luchino Visconti wants to show enters from the windows and shows all of them. And talking about one more thing I want to say, then we go to the second clip unless you want to add something. This is a closed world. One of the things that I want to emphasize that every time someone enters the Corleone family during the films, they're seen with great suspicion, including Tom Hagen. In the second part, he's humiliated a couple of times because he's not their blood. And not to mention Carlo Rizzi. Carlo Rizzi is the husband of Connie Corleone, who is a traitor, but then is killed.
There are going to be many spoilers. There have already been all the spoilers.
I'm assuming you all watched.
So I'm not even giving you a warning. This is all about spoiling these movies. So if you have not seen it, run out and go see them and then come back. But if you have seen them, you're...
So let's go to the second clip. Before we deal a little bit with traditions, I want to start from this very last sequence, this is Padre Pirrone, played by the marvelous stage actor Romolo Valli. And what he says reminds me a lot of the literary controversy between Hemingway and Fitzgerald. There is that beautiful short story by Fitzgerald called The Rich Boy that starts, let me tell you about the rich man, they're different from you and me. And apparently, a few years later, Hemingway spoke with his editor, who was also Fitzgerald editor, Max Perkins, and said the only difference between the rich people and us is they have more money. I don't know who was
then
right.
There's the other great quote by Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday is the best quote ever, if you want to say.
I've been rich and I've been poor. Rich is better. End of the story.
I totally agree. Traditions. It's scary what happens at the end of the scene with Clemenza. I want to say this to Molly. Andrew Saris once told me that, according to him, the best performance in The Godfather is Richard Castellano. I don't know if it was completely right, but it's definitely right to say that it's an incredible performance, underrated, because he plays a small role. And basically, we remember only for this film. He plays one of the killers, one of the most ominous killers, but we see him now preparing the sauce and teaching Al Pacino, who is still not a mafioso, is still a war hero, because one of the stories of this film is a war hero becoming a criminal. He teaches how to make a good sauce. And he's serious. He says, you put some sugar, the tomato, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, when James Caan suddenly asks about what happens about Paulie, you never heard of him. So you understand that the tradition, the beauty of it, goes together with criminality and the horror of it. At the beginning, you have seen Al Pacino, Michael, saying, never against your family. Marlon Brando saying something that can be, we can even agree with him. But all of a sudden, you see how Coppola shows the other side. While in the Leopard, we see the celebration of a tradition. They arrive in Donna Fugata, it's their vacation place, and every night, the night they arrive, they know that it will be served il timballo di anellini, which is a fantastic dish, by the way.
That is going to be the culinary protagonist of Big Night, right?
Yes.
When the whole struggle between the two brothers is the one that wants to continue make spaghetti al pomodoro and the usual Italian dishes, and the other one has the ambition of cooking a timballo, and it's exactly from here.
Before going to Freedom, I want to say something that I forgot before. The reason why The Leopard was dismissed and refused by Einaudi is because it was considered a reactionary novel. I disagree. I asked this to Gioacchino Lanza Domazzi, our dear friend who passed away a few months ago. He is the model for the Tancredi character in The Leopard. He was the nephew of Giuseppe Tomasi.
An adoptive son.
Yes. And he told me the only difference between the film and the book, because differently from the book, the novel was loaded also from the left, is that the book is narrated through the eyes of someone who was lost the fight of Risorgimento, while the film is narrated by a winner. That's a big difference.
That had to do with the two political persuasions of the Prince of Lampedusa. We don't know exactly what he thought in politics. We know that he was a conservative center in the post-war Italian situation. He was not a fascist, but he was definitely not a communist. And the message that in order for everything to remain the same, you have to change everything, is a very anti-revolutionary message. So that was the reason. But the fact is that Italian publishing world at that time was under a very, very strict control of a very ideologized Communist Party in Italy, and therefore...
Especially Einaudi.
Einaudi, but also Mondadori rejected it. So, and big writers, like one was Vittorini,
yes,
that you might know as author of Conversations in Sicily. He's one of those who rejected The Leopard for publication, making the publishing house of Feltrinelli incredibly rich. By the way, the most left-wing publishing house in Italy.
And it's interesting and it's important to remember that the person who discovered the manuscript of Feltrinelli was another great writer, Giorgio Bassani.
The author of The Garden of the Finzi Contini. He was an author in his own right of both novels, short stories, and poetry, but he was his job really that paid his bills was working for Feltrinelli as a reader of proposals. And the proposal was submitted anonymous. So there was no name, but he met briefly Lampedusa at a poets' conference in Venice.
Yes, in a poets' conference.
And he thought the only author of this thing could be that man that I met there. But he was already dead when the manuscript arrived on Giorgio Bassani's desk and approved for publication.
Let's deal with freedom now.
Let's.
So the first scene is from Godfather 2. Is the moment where Vito Andolini he has no name of Corleone, arrives in Ellis Island. I think it's a brilliant but also pivotal moment, and in my opinion also a touch of genius of Coppola, because he sees the Statue of Liberty and he sings a lullaby from his own country with melancholy. But the idea is not only the melancholy of the past, of what is lost, but somehow Coppola is suggesting that he's already melancholic for what he will lose. He knows already what is going to happen. This is what he suggests us. And I think it's really a touch of genius. The other scene is when they arrive in Donna Fugata before taking a shower and having the timballo di Anellini. And what Visconti is telling us, they're like a funerary monument of themselves. They're completely covered with dust.
They're immobile.
Yes.
And the chorus stalls look really like caskets. And I have images here from the Cripta dei Cappuccini. How many of you have been there?
In Palermo.
In Palermo. There is one in Palermo and one in Rome. And that's where people belonging to the aristocracy got their burial place, very unusual burial, so they didn't have caskets, so they were not buried inside. They were exposed, and with a system of almost embalming, they would be visible. So this is the little girl that you find in the Cripta dei Cappuccini that is very resemblant of the last girl we saw.
Girl.
So there couldn't be a more clear reference to death, that these are alive, but it is already as if they were dead, immobile in their caskets and covered in
It's a
dust.
group of corpses.
Yeah.
Let's go now to the fourth block, which is about women, how women are narrated and treated in these two films. You can stop for a second here. The man is Hyman Roth, is based on the real character Meyer Lansky, who was a big criminal, and is the rival of Al Pacino. In the film, is killed by Al Pacino, and we see this woman with him only twice. These two scenes, we never see her face, and the way he treats her, it's really horrible. Go and play, go and do something. We don't know if it's his wife, his mistress, his whatever. But the way he treats her is, I would say, revelatory, especially if you compare it to the way the women of the Corleone family are narrated. Let's see now. We don't see very much Con in the film. We see the film opens with her wedding. He is married to, she marries Carlo Rizzi, who will betray her in the family. And she's beaten and abused by Carlo. And when she realizes that Al Pacino, Michael, gave the order to kill her husband, she has a big scene, and of course, Al Pacino, Michael denies. And when Diane Keaton, his wife, asks, what happened? Was she, did you give the order? He denies, of course, and he calls her hysterical. And the arch of the character is interesting because she's a little bit over the top. She's, from what we see, quite superficial. But then in part 2, and especially part 3, she becomes part of the family, almost a Lady Macbeth. In the part 3, which I don't like, she's the best allied to Al Pacino. One thing, she's screaming happy like a groupie because Johnny Fontaine, Frank Sinatra, participates to the wedding. And a brief thing, there are no proof that mafia helped Frank Sinatra to become Frank Sinatra, but there are several proofs that he was friends with several gangsters. I want to show you a picture. That's Sam Giancana. And if you want to go on YouTube, you will find him talking about the Bonanno family or others. Let's go now to the...
Antonio, one quick question. We talked about the patriarchs and the Ottoman patriarchs and the role of these two men in the family. And I was rethinking about something that Puzo said, and I believe in the audience there is Professor Gattuso Hendin. She's teaching a course right now in Italian-American literature, so she can correct me if my memory is not serving me. Puzo said that the Godfather was his mother. Yes. That the inspiration for the Godfather...
Yes, including the voice. Although the idea of the voice so low is that he doesn't need to speak loud. The other people should do like this. But apparently the mother had that voice. Yes.
So, and how does that gender crossing between a mother becoming a padrino?
You should ask the Puzo family. I don't know. I don't know. But let's see how, because Il Padrino, the Godfather, is a great example of manipulation. And when I say manipulation, I'm not saying this in a derogatory way. Hitchcock was a great manipulator. But one of the things he wants us to root for the Corleone family. And not only because all the others are worse than the Corleone, but he actually likes some of the the attitudes and the tradition. Let's see how Mama Corleone is portrayed. She appears 2 minutes in the film, and I think it's quite unforgettable. I'm sorry, no, this is first Diane Keaton, Kay Adams. But first of all, we saw Al Pacino. Stop for a second. We saw Al Pacino's eyes because he's still a war hero. Now I have an anecdote, but quite interesting. Mario Puzo was doing some research for The Godfather, and he invited Gay Talese for lunch. And Gay Talese was writing, I think, Honor Thy Father. And Gay brought his wife, Nan, and watching them, the combination between this Calabrese guy and a wasp, he had the idea of Kay Adams. So Kay Adams is based on Nan Talese. Now, I want you to know this. Where is she? Okay, look at Mama Corleone. This is the wedding scene. The way she sings, the way she acts. So whatever you might think of the family, this woman is lovable. I mean, she can be a grandmother, my grandmother, your grandmother. And Coppola wants us to love her. And she's fantastic, the way she moves, the way she acts, the way she sings. Her name is Morgana King. And again, you see her only in this scene and another scene. That's it. Now let's watch now the Leopard women. So I had the great privilege of doing the DVD for the Criterion Collection of this film, and I interviewed most of the protagonists, including the screenwriter Suso Cecchi D'Amico. And I asked something that I always ask in my class, what this film is about, in one line. And her definition is the granddaughter of Peppe Cauchet, who becomes a noble. The grand noble of Peppe Merta, who becomes an aristocrat. Angelica, she's the daughter of Calogero Sedara, we will see him later, a mafioso basically, and the granddaughter of a man who is so, how do you say, animalistic.
Disgusting and
yes,
animal-like.
He was nicknamed Peppe Cauchet. And of course, it's the arrival of the new Riche into this incredibly glamorous and refined family. That's right. There is another woman, I think, now, the princess. The princess understands what's going on. She cannot accept that their daughter will not be the wife of Tancredi, but she has no chance because the prince knows that in order to save his family, he has to accept that the granddaughter of Peppe Cauchet becomes a noble.
The family is very noble, very aristocratic. They have a lot of titles, but they have no more money.
Yeah.
So they need an injection of fresh money. And it's only Angelica's father, Don Calogero, who has the money. He's somebody who took advantage of the process of unification. He bought the lands that were sold out of the elimination of latifunds or from the church, and he became rich because of that. And they desperately need that kind of money in order to keep the family in the position that it has. The titles are not enough.
Do I have time for another anecdote?
Of course.
Once, Gioacchino Lanza was the director of the Italian Cultural Institute for 4 years, came to lunch, and he was very tired. I say, how do you feel, Gioacchino? Why are you so tired? You know, Antonio, I am the first one in my family who has to work in 7 centuries. Welcome to Sicily. Okay, let's go.
We all love Gioacchino, though.
Oh, we adore him. These are films with great lines. There is very little to add to these fantastic lines, but maybe we can say something about Bar Lancaster and this last line, which is now called like gattopardismo, leopardism. Yes, it's definitely not a left-wing line, it's not a revolutionary line, but I wouldn't go that far to say that it's a reactionary book or novel or film at all.
It's a nostalgic book. It's all a book about nostalgia, about a time that is no longer and is not going to come back. If anything, that's I would say that it's main feeling that you get from the book. But when you are used to give a politicized reading of everything you read, the lack of an explicit political stance, especially of the left, is immediately read as reactionary.
And Visconti was not happy at the beginning with the Bar Lancaster for two reasons. First, because he was forced to work with Lancaster. His idea, again, was either Laurence Olivier or Nikolai Cherkasov. And second, because Goffredo Lombardi hired him without consulting him. So for the first couple of weeks, he almost refused to talk to him. Not only that, but they started from the scene of the dance, the famous ball. And he was not very good in dancing, and he humiliated repeatedly in front of the crew. Visconti was not a nice man, no. A great director, but not a nice man. And but there is a beautiful ending to the story because they become friends, and they discovered that they had the same birthday, November 2nd. And Bar Lancaster asked Renato Guttuso, was a very famous Italian painter from Palermo, to paint something for him, ignoring that Visconti had the same idea. He asked Renato Guttuso to paint something for Bar Lancaster. The lucky man was Guttuso, who sold 2 paintings, but they were both moved by this idea. They become friends for forever. And actually, almost at the end of their career, when Visconti made Conversation piece, which starred Bar Lancaster, and he was on a wheelchair because he had a stroke, Bart Lancaster became the grantor with the insurance. So it's a beautiful.
That the film would be completed, yes.
Yes, beautiful.
And then Lancaster was also responsible for the American edition of The Leopard.
Absolutely.
The American distributor didn't want to present in American theaters a 3-hour-long movie, and 3 hours, one of which is a ballroom scene. So they wanted cut. Visconti said, I didn't even want to hear the word, but it's yours, do whatever you want. Ask Mr. Lancaster to do the American editing, and he did. And there is actually, if you buy the DVD, the Criterion, you have the original restored version from which the clips are taken, and then you have the very much cut American version, but that was edited by Lancaster.
And you remember how The Leopard was launched in this country?
The Italian Via col Vento, Gone with the Wind.
The Italian Gone with the Wind.
The gowns.
Yeah. No, there is something. I mean, it's a revolution seen from the eyes of the Southerners and the losers. Let's watch. Dancing. So I want you to notice the reaction to the dance. The princess, who is upset, Alain Delon Tancredi, who is jealous, and of course, Concetto is desperate. It's interesting that her brother, Paolo, this one played by Pierre Clementi, doesn't understand what's going on. And in the book, it said that the prince understands that he's not very smart. That's why his favorite, his pupil, is his nephew, Tancredi. He will be disappointed by Tancredi, but definitely smarter than his son. I always like the way Angelica Claudia Cardinale speaks in this scene, because it's clear that she's not a costume, she's clumsy, she wants to say a compliment, say, you're much more the good, you're delightful, it means nothing to me. And the beauty of the scene is somehow melted with these different reactions. There are two different tensions, you know, because in this very moment, Angelica is seducing not only Tancredi, but also the prince.
The entire audience.
And of course, the entire audience. And you will see in the next scene what she's doing. But let's go back for a second to the Godfather. Again, manipulation. How can you not like that moment? If you see who is there, they're all criminals, killers, horrible people. But in that moment, you do not see the criminal. You see a father who is dancing with his daughter in a wedding day. That's the manipulation and the beauty of it. I think that's the strength of the film. Let's go now to see what Angelica does. In the first scene, we see the moment where he becomes a criminal. Until that very moment, we can see his eyes, for example. But that's a great moment of sound editing. We hear what he hears, amplified, for example, the subway. And again, manipulation. Sollozzo, Allettieri, and the corrupt cop played by Sterling Hayden. The first one tried to kill Don Vito, the second one beated him. So somehow we root for him. We want him. We want him to kill this couple.
Antonio, one question about what has been called the glamorization of the Godfather, so much so that it became sort of a fashion icon and imitated by lots of people. And you know there are different opinions regarding these operation from a sociological point of view, from a moral point of view. Was it already present in the book, or is it something that is added by Coppola in the film? This thought of glamorizing and making us root and feel for the family and for Don Vito.
Let me respond with a quote by Pauline Kael. When she saw that extraordinary film called The Battle of Algiers, she wrote, Gillo Pontecorvo is the most dangerous kind of Marxist. He's a Marxist poet. Coppola is a poet, so he's dangerous. So he put the glamour, definitely. It's a dangerous film, there is no doubt, but it's a work of art. And let's go now to the second scene. It's the moment where Tancredi seems to be honestly convinced to support the revolution, and his uncle, Don Fabrizio, gives him some money. His arch is another, road to perdition, because at the end they will be on the side of the reactionaries, and actually will applaud when his friends, his colleagues, are killed. But that's the moment where Don Fabrizio probably understands, and he hates doing this, but still believes that the only chance is to believe Tancredi. Tancredi as the revolutionary and Tancredi as the husband of Angelica. Let's go now. There is a second clip that is a follow-up of this. I think these are two of the most beautiful scenes of the film. Let's start from the second one. Of course, Paolo Stoppa, Don Calogero Sedara, is the mastermind of the entire operation. He's the one who introduces Angelica, his daughter Angelica, knowing perfectly what's going to happen. And if you see the reactions of all the protagonists of this scene, you see immediately that she's winning. And Lampedusa used a wonderful expression. I'll say this in Italian first. Entrò con l'invincibilità della sicura bellezza. She entered the room with the invincibility, the boldness of sure beauty. She's invincible. And if you see the way Padre Pirrone, the priest, understands immediately, Ciccio Tumeo, who is the guy who goes hunting with the prince, and of course Tancredi and the prince himself, they all speechless for the beauty. And of course the two women, Concetta, and especially the princess was a cute. That's the only thing she said. While the other scene is, first of all, it doesn't exist in the book. It was written for the film by Robert Towne, and I think it's one of the most significant scenes, not only because it's quite moving, but it's also quite ominous what he says, because the bottom line is there was not enough time. The idea is that with time, you purify your crimes. I shouldn't add anything else. But again, manipulation, it's a father talking to his son. But what he's saying is terrible. And he says also, I knew that Santino, Sonny, and I'll say something at the end about Santino, and I knew that Fredo, he doesn't even say anything about Fredo, because he's inept. It's a wonderful scene, it's so simple. They're close-ups, basically.
And in the scene when Angelica arrives, is right before the dinner scene where she bursts into this very vulgar laughter. So in this scene, she's impeccable. And you could tell that she has been studying with the nuns in Florence that trained the daughters of the aristocracy, because she does everything perfect. She goes straight to the princess because she's the lady of the house. She doesn't stop when all the other men try to approach her. No, and she respects the hierarchy. The princess first, the prince next, Concetta, the priest, and then everybody else. But then when she has the dinner table, her real nature comes up. And no matter how many years she studied at the nuns, her laughter is so vulgar that it really gives away her origin. But it's I giochi sono fatti.
You rightfully say that Don Calogero Sedara is the rich man, but we should emphasize the fact that he's a mafioso, a precursor of mafia. Mafia didn't exist the way we know it now. But it's interesting that in The Leopard there is also a mafioso character. And we see this in the scene of the hunting scene. Ciccio Tumeo, I'll show you later, tells the Don Fabrizio what happened to someone who tried to oppose to his...
The expansion of the real estate empire of Don Calogero, yes.
You have three more scenes. Let's see the first one. I think the marvel of this scene is that Chevalier was sent by Conte Cavour, trying to convince him to become a senator, cannot understand. They speak two different languages. And his pride, the prince's pride, goes together with his tragedy. He is proud to say, we were the leopards, we are the lions, but it's also his tragedy. And but the important scene, I think, is the previous one, where we understand that the new state, the new Piedmontese state, the unification in Italy, starts with corruption, with a fraud. From the very beginning, the very first election. And going back to the fact that it was refused twice, the manuscript, there is very little to add to the Corleone scenes, except that also we are two faces of the same hypocrisy is one of the great lines of the book. And I'm sure you noticed that the senator has no light in his eyes. Yeah. Let's go. So the second scene, the one between Fredo and Michael, It's quite stunning because first of all, because of the setting. Once again, we are in an interior which is quite dark, and outside there is the light, but now it's frozen, it's chilly. And another great idea, I don't know if you notice, when Al Pacino starts to talk at the end, you're no longer a brother, a friend, etc., you see the air coming from his mouth. It's like, it's frozen. They're completely dead. And it's quite scary when he say, don't touch him until our mother is alive, or whatever. And in the second part, we see the leopard once again showing pride, but he show pride because he knows that he's changing completely this, and this is his word is gonna die. It's a pivotal moment in the film, and a minute before, he said to his friend Chevalier a story about English visitors in Palermo who were completely in love with the beauty of the city, but at the same time horrified by the poverty and the misery. And the prince comments, these English people did not understand that one thing comes from the other, which is cynical, but tragic, and true, in Palermo. Okay, let's go now. We have a final, actually two, but they're tied.
Do you want to play them together? Or
No,
you want to stop?
First one.
Okay.
So, flirting is just a euphemism. She's doing much more than that.
Tell us what Suso Cecchi D'Amico told you in confidence after you interviewed her for the Criterion
Can I say
Collection
it's
about
not
the
politically
character
correct?
It's Suso Cecchi D'Amico.
Angelica is a slut. This is what she said. And you have seen what she did here. But the point is that this is an epic film. Eros and Thanatos, death and love go together. He's contemplating a dying man. He knows that soon he will die. And all of a sudden, Angelica appears, kisses him, and they dance. And what is interesting is Tancredi accept that because it's the only way she can enter the family. In the book, we will know that their marriage will not be happy at all. 20 years later, they both have lovers. But in the film, they leave the scene in a triumph. The first scene is, which one? Sorry. Oh, yes, it's the death of the Godfather. Once again, how can you not love him in that scene? And this is also a film of both films of great performances. Brando, I think, gives one of the greatest performances ever, but also Lancaster. The reason why Visconti didn't want him, not only because he didn't cast him, because he considered him a cowboy. Say, why this cowboy should play a Sicilian prince? And in fact, he was perfect and marvelous. Let's watch now the final block, which is longer, but I think it's important to see it. Every time I see this scene, I cry. But let me go back to The Godfather. In the first scene, the first sequence, we see Al Pacino. He gave the order to kill his own brother. And he's also sending a message to the outside world. He's ready to kill his own brother. But then we have this scene that is... Oh, first of all, he disappears completely in the darkness. And then we remember something happened many years before, when he was still a war hero, actually even before becoming a war hero. And the very first time I saw the film, I got the impression that it was the last moment of serenity, if not innocence. Not at all. You understand immediately what's going on in that family. The way Santino, Sonny, James Caan acts, the way Fredo acts. And almost all of them will be either killed sometime from the inside the family, or like Tessio, who is another traitor. Of course, Fredo, Sonny will be massacred. And you understand perfectly what's going on inside the Corleone family. There is no innocence at all. Although in their mentality is a moment of peace and serenity because they're celebrating the Don birthday. The second scene is quite revelatory because it's the moment where finally Barlancazza understands that it's the end. It's the end of his world. It's the end of his breed. And he cries. But the important things are two, where he cries and what happens with the light. He cries alone in a bathroom full of urine pots. So the beauty and the glory of that incredible palazzo called Palazzo Gangi has this 20, 30 urine pots. And we go back to the scene with the English people. One thing comes from the other. It's a world where urine pots and the beauty and the magnificence go together. And finally, the light. If you read the novel, Lampedusa says, entrò la luce dell'alba plebea. The light of the dawn entered plebeian. And the way Rotunno, for the first time, has a very acid and cold light in the entire film, shows the arrival of the plebeian light in a world where the granddaughter of Pepe Cauchet becomes an aristocrat. Finally, I want to say something that Coppola told me when I reached him and I told him that I loved the film, as everybody. And I say, I think this is a film that we can be considered like a metaphor of American capitalism. He looked at me, what the hell are you talking about? And then I try to change immediately. I say, this is a story of a war hero becomes a criminal. It was
closer, but
closer,
not right.
Closer. And I say, no, this is a story of a king who has 3 sons. One has his goodness, Fredo. One is strength, Sonny. And one is intelligence, Al Pacino, Michael. With these words, I can say only thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoyed it. And watch again the film.